Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you to the September 18th Planning, Energy, and Environmental Quality Committee. Here in the chamber, as far as members, we have myself and legislators Gregory, Mezey, and Randy Brown, and remotely we have legislator Susan Currie, and I believe Veronica Pillar will be joining us in a little bit, but we have quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. Do we have any public comment? Okay. Any changes to the agenda that anybody has? Okay. Why don't we go right to minutes approval. We have the minutes from August 21st, so thanks to the clerks for doing that. Would someone like to move the minutes? Moved by Randy, seconded by Greg. Any discussion, questions? Okay, so we'll have to do roll call since we have somebody remotely. So we'll go in the same order just so it'll be easy. So we'll start with me, Greg, and Randy, and then Susan. So I'll vote in favor of the minutes.
Yes.
Greg, yes. Randy?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. And then for chair's report, I have a couple of things. The first one, I went to or a couple of us went to the NYSEC, New York State Association of Counties, some of the committee meetings, and some people actually went to the whole conference, but I went for some of the meetings because I'm on some of the committees. So this is, I went to the one, I'm a member of the Climate Action Committee, and I just want to state that the two resolutions that we passed there, because possibly next month or so, I might bring those to the committee and ask if we also are interested in passing resolutions and also in the support. So one of them was resolution urging the expeditious establishment of the New York State Stewardship Program that includes both packaging and printed paper. And where you've probably heard many people talk about, it's referred to it as the extender producer responsibility. So we can talk about that again if we bring that forward. And then the second one in that committee was urging NYSERDA to expeditiously implement and promote the incentives and rebates created by the Inflation Reduction Act to enhance energy efficiency and climate mitigation in New York State. And part of that urges the state to authorize a rebate program for low and moderate incomes to receive rebates for home efficiency improvements, which I'm really excited about, and I think the state absolutely needs to do, so that it's not just people that can afford to make energy efficient improvements to their house. And then I am also a member of the Economic Development, Environmental, and Energy Committee, and we passed a couple of resolutions, but the one I wanted to highlight was the one calling on New York State to develop a comprehensive approach to regulating PFAS, which are a whole group of toxic chemicals, and holding manufacturers accountable for PFAS use and treatment costs. So that's that. Any questions on those? Okay. And then also, again, wanted to thank folks on Recycling for the tour that they gave us a couple weeks ago of the Recycling and Materials Management Department. And that's all I had for my report. And for members, if there's things you want to update on us, we'll have time at the end of the meeting. So maybe we can talk about a couple of things then. And next we'll go right into the Department of Planning and Sustainability. I don't see, let's see, I don't know if we have an overall report, or we just go to Terry?
I don't think we have an overall report, right, Katie?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So we can jump right into me. So
I'm just
unfortunately,
going to just say packet page 9, Terry has a presentation for us, or an update.
yeah, an update. So I provided a memo in the agenda, and I'm happy to answer questions on that. I'll just give a brief overview of it. So in April, earlier this year, we went through this committee and then the legislature authorizing an agreement with Gravity Renewables to sell renewable energy certificates. We had talked about how the county was basically doubling up on some of our renewable energy certificates that we use to meet our green energy pledges. And so we were going to try and sell some of them in order to recoup some money and then put that towards, I think we had talked with the administration about using that to pay down some of the debt from the Green Facilities Project. So since then, we've been working with Gravity to get everything in place to start selling them. And unfortunately, we ran into a dead end where a regulation that we knew existed is unfortunately being applied more broadly than what we thought it was, than what Gravity thought it was. And so unfortunately, it's applying to this project. Essentially, all remote net metered projects in New York State are being, at this point, not allowed to transfer the renewable energy certificates that they generate. The reason this is because New York State considers it to be double counting. In their mind, they've funded all remote net metering projects. That is not the case with the Waterloo project. They did not fund the Waterloo project at all, but for the vast majorities of remote net metered projects, they do contribute some funding, and so they don't want to then see their money be recouped through the sale of renewable energy certificates that they don't get a share in. So they've outlawed the ability to transfer those RECs, and we're being caught in the midst of it. So we could file a petition with the Public Service Commission. But because it applies to such a small subset of projects, Gravity doesn't think it'll go very far. They don't think that the commission will look at it seriously, and it would just be a lot of time and money for something that's unlikely to happen. So we've run into this dead end where we're not going to be able to sell our renewable energy certificates, unfortunately. So in terms of financial impacts, we hadn't budgeted any of that funding. I had talked with Norm about that a week or two ago, so we won't see any impacts to this in the budget. It's just disappointing because a lot of work went into this on our end and on Gravity's end. So I will say that the other part of that agreement did have us extending our contract with Gravity for an additional 5 years, and I believe it's still our intention to do that, and we're still working with Gravity on that specific piece. But the rest of it will not happen, unfortunately. So I'll take any questions on that.
Thank you for working on that, and sorry to hear that. Any question, or Greg?
What was the potential rec revenue that we were anticipating?
Yeah, it was anywhere from $30,000 to $70,000. It would all depend on kind of the generation of the hydro facility in that given year, and then the price of the renewable energy certificates. That was currently. In the future, who knows kind of where the rec prices are going. It could go up or down. So, but in the short term, we were thinking somewhere between $30,000 to $70,000.
And how much would it take to petition the Public Service Commission? Is that who it goes through?
It would go through the Public Service Commission. To be honest with you, I don't entirely know. This was in talks with Gravity. They were the ones that basically, and they would be the ones that would petition. I guess theoretically the county could. To them, they didn't deem it worthwhile. So
Got it. So just so that I understand correctly, the state thinks that they paid for a majority of, or for all of these type of projects, and they didn't pay for this one?
So they know that they didn't pay for this one, but when the law went into effect, this was in 2017, the way it was written was broadly, and it just encompassed all remote net metering projects. And from talking with Gravity, my understanding is when they wrote the law, their thinking was, oh, we're paying for all these remote net metering projects, so we're just going to extend it broadly. And we're unfortunately being caught in that because we are a remote net metered project.
So this not only has a 2024 budget impact, but it has a budget impact for the 5 years that we have a contract with Gravity?
Longer than that. It will, because it was originally, it would be through the remainder of our contract with Gravity, which, I think was until 2030 something in the original contract, and then the additional 5 years beyond that. So yeah.
Okay, so it's real money.
It's real money.
And was it our anticipation when we did this that we would have the ability to sell the RECs?
Yeah, in our conversations with Gravity and us, we were both under the impression we would be able to do it. It wasn't until we were in the last stages of registering with the New York State Attribute Generation Attribute Tracking System, NIGATS, that it was discovered that we wouldn't be able to transfer. And then that was the conversation that Gravity had first with NYSERDA and then with the Public Service Commission, where it became apparent that we wouldn't.
Interesting, okay.
Randy?
So do the certificates still exist?
Yep, they still exist. We're still going to be getting them. We're going to be retiring them as we always did. What it means.
No value.
Well, yeah, for no value. I mean, it has the value that we're using it to basically say, hey, we're using this for green energy. Unfortunately, we already have a separate contract that we get that does the same thing. So for about anywhere from a third to half of our energy, we're double counting the renewable energy certificates. In 3 years, when our contract with Constellation is up, we could look at, a third to half of our energy and not get renewable energy certificates for that. But we had locked in that contract already this year before we got this news. So we're kind of tied to double counting for the next 3 years.
Thank you.
So for the Waterloo project, it looks like nobody involved in the project will be able to take advantage of it. So when we renew, is that going to be a factor, knowing that we wouldn't get those RECs?
No, I mean, it wouldn't be a factor. I mean, we'll just know going forward that unless something changes in New York State law, which we don't anticipate, that we just will never be able to monetize these RECs, and we'll just continue to be able to retire them for our own electricity needs, but not for anything else.
So say you said 30,000 to 70,000 for 1 year of RECs, is that correct? Yeah. So if we're looking at, say, 5 years, that could be, estimate of like 250,000. But Gravity doesn't think it's.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is that because there's some volatility in the REC markets, and there's some thought that in a few years, as more renewable generating assets come online, that it could drive the prices of renewable energy certificates down. So instead of it being worth $30,000 to $70,000, maybe it'll be worth $15,000 to $50,000, and then 5 years after that, it'll be worth even less. It's a difficult thing because this is impacting our project, but it's also impacting a couple of other hydro projects. And so to them, I think they just don't feel like there's a high chance of success in fighting the Public Service or Gravity Renewables.
Oh, Gravity Renewables,
yeah,
okay.
Who we have the agreement with. They just don't feel like there's a high chance of success of petitioning the Public Service Commission on this.
Do they have anything to gain or benefit by not fighting or by fighting?
By fighting, I mean, they were going to be we were paying them like a 5% fee of whatever we were selling, and then above a certain amount of revenue, it became revenue sharing to incentivize, selling at a higher price. So they do have some monetary gain, whether it's enough, skin in the game to make it worthwhile. I will say, they were talking about doing it with us on this project, but they were also talking about doing it with Skidmore on a hydro facility that they had and a couple of other universities that they work with. And so, across the range, yeah, I think they did have some financial gain to come from it. I don't think that they're doing this just because, it's not worth it to them. I do think that it's probably, they just don't see it being successful. And I trust that they've vetted it correctly.
Thank you. Anything else, Terry?
The last thing that I'll just mention on the hydro facility. So Rob and I were actually there last week taking some video of the hydro facility with the drone for a video that we're shooting that we're hopeful we'll be able to show all of you soon. But when we were there, we were talking with Gravity, and they did mention that, they're always happy to do a tour of the facility. I know we did one probably 4 or 5 years ago, it was before COVID, with the legislature, and I think people found it interesting. They like to see the facility. So if there's ever any interest in that, Gravity did say that they're more than happy to do it. the best time would be the fall or the spring when the, rains are running and, there's the actual turbines are going in the hydro facility, but it's always beautiful to get out there and check things out. It's pretty cool. I mean, the turbines themselves were put in 1906. And it's the same turbines have run since that time, and they use these wooden bearings. We think of everything being now so high tech, but it's wooden bearings that are driving, 2 of the 3 turbines. It's pretty remarkable stuff. So if there's interest, let me know, and we're happy to arrange it.
Is there interest in that from members?
I would be interested. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, if you could see about setting something up when time permits and
Yeah.
the season's right, and ask the legislators to go. I was out there,
Right.
4 or 5 years ago, and it's really cool to see. Randy?
What does actually remote metering mean? Does that mean because we're here and
Yeah.
it's there?
Exactly, yeah, because we're not directly receiving the power,
Okay.
and it's just being put in the grid, and we're getting remotely the credits for it. That's where it's coming from, yeah.
Great. Anything else, Terry?
Nothing on my end.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next, we have Department of Recycling and Materials Management, and looks like we have our new director, Leo Riley, and we have Kat McCarthy here. So do you have any general report, or do you want to get right to the capital summary? I'll leave it up to you folks.
Yeah, we don't have any report, and we can get right to it.
Okay, so there's the capital summary report on packet page 12. Did you have anything you wanted to say, or just leave it for questions from the members?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
That's packet page 12. It's a pretty simple summary. Okay, doesn't seem like there's any questions on, one question.
Yes. Hi, Kat. Hi, Leo. So I'm looking at this, and it says the total project amount was $2.67 million. And it says paid to date 124. Is that in this year or for the whole project?
That's the whole project. And I believe that's 2021 through 2025.
So the large majority of this project has not been done yet?
We are looking at engineering. So engineering work gets paid out of this project. We have 2 projects going. We have an ARPA project going, and we have this recycling solid waste center upgrades. So the engineering for the ARPA is paid for out of this project. And then we also have projects going next year. That's when we're moving the yard waste area and kind of combining in organics area. But yes, I believe that's just engineering, Randy.
Okay.
So that's just engineering. I believe the remainder of the total project also includes the construction.
So this may be a question for Norma. So this isn't in our capital budget. This is separate in their own entity?
No, that's in our capital budget, but
This
it's,
is in the county's capital budget?
yes, yeah, all of theirs, but they are enterprise, and they're shown with an offsetting revenue that comes from their collections.
So it's a net to us?
Net zero to the county.
Okay, great, thank
Cost.
you.
Yeah, so, sorry if I didn't explain that very well, Randy.
Any other questions on that? All right, and there's not a packet page for this, but next we have from you folks an update on rethinking waste in Tompkins County, creating or fostering a local circular economy, which is not easy for me to say at this time of the morning.
It's a nice, concise title right there. So we can provide just a brief update today. We discussed last meeting kind of the past of where we are today. We just wanted to share a little bit more about kind of where things are going. We are in the process of continuing to review our public comment. We've been summarizing the comments and grouping them into themes for this responsiveness summary. And we've also been working on ensuring accuracy of the biosolids piece. We've reached out to all 7 wastewater treatment facilities in Tompkins County to just collect that information and ensure that we've updated it, considering the attention that that area has also received. So work is continuing to be underway on updating, and we'll keep you posted as it continues to move forward.
Thanks, Kat. Any questions? Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thanks to your department, to your staff. I thank them at the legislature meeting, but thanks again to all of you from Leo and Kat, and also I believe there was Nate, Kate, and Jeremy that gave us legislators and administration a tour a couple weeks ago. So thank you very much. It was very informative.
Yeah, you're welcome. We're glad you came over.
Okay. I think since the last meeting, is that correct, since our last peak meeting, that, Leo, that you were appointed as director, so congratulations on that.
Thank you, Ann.
Anything else from your department?
I don't believe so.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us today, and you're welcome to stay for the conversation, or just to kind of see what we're doing. And next, Norma, do you have anything from county administration, any report?
Yeah, I just wanted, Leo, you are in active search for a deputy, right?
Leo?
Yes, yes, that is posted as we speak.
All right, I thought that would be good for the committee to know. Yeah, so just to bring the resolution to change the universities, colleges, and similar institutions' annual fee for solid waste is going to be coming to the legislature tomorrow, just to let you know. This will be according to student enrollment, but the resolution does not establish the actual fee. It only establishes the methodology of how we establish units for that fee. So that you're going to bring that tomorrow, right? Yep.
Okay, great. And any questions for Norma on that? Anything else from administration?
Nope, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we're rolling right along, so we're up next to our report from CLEAN, Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Network, and I see Brian's here in the chambers from CLEAN. I don't know if folks know Brian Eden. I'll let you introduce yourself in a minute. And then I believe we have John Dennis remotely. Is there anybody else from your group? Oh, Stephanie Redman. Okay.
That's about it.
Okay. First, I wanted to say, before we get into your presentation and discussion, I did, since we're going to be talking about Cargill, I did reach out to Cargill to see if they wanted to comment on whether the Lansing salt mine was up for sale, if I invited them to this committee to talk with us and respond or listen in. Let's see, so I'm going to read some of this. I emailed the Cargill's general manager, Sean Wilczynski, and he then called me and asked I asked if he could respond to the reports that I've been hearing that Lansing salt mine is up for sale. I invite him to our meeting today. He said that Cargill does not respond to rumors and speculation. And then also Cargill's new director of government relations, Tom Freeman, also called me. And he said the exact same thing, word for word, and they both declined to come today. But at least we reached out to them, and maybe they'll be watching the meeting. So next, members of CLEAN reached out to me, John Dennis did, and to ask about coming to speak with us today, a little bit about the history of Cargill, And so I'm going to let you guys take it from here. If you want to go around, I'll call on you if you want to introduce yourselves, the three of you, and then you can start your presentation. I'll start with Brian, since you're here in the chambers.
Yeah, I plan to start off the presentation.
Oh, you're going to?
Yeah, well,
okay.
This issue.
You want to just introduce yourself, and then we'll?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Well, I'm just going to say that.
All right.
That Brian Eden, formerly chair of the EMC, and this is where this work began in like 2015, 2016, and we've carried it out of the EMC because the EMC is an advisory group and cannot necessarily lobby for changes. So, we took it to a new group called Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now, and so I'll leave it there.
Okay. Thank you. Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Redmond. I'm the program manager for Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now and have been doing a bit of research around the surface operations at the Cargill site. Grew up, born and raised in Lansing, so I'm interested in see how this project folds out.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'll just mention she's not here in this capacity, but she is also a supervisor of the town of Enfield. So thanks for joining us today. John?
Yes, I'm John Dennis. It's a privilege to speak today. And with Brian, I co-founded CLEAN, Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now, in 2017. And that really did sort of derive from our awareness of the Shaft 4 project, where Cargill was investing about $35 million into building a new shaft. And I do have a PowerPoint ready whenever you're ready to start.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll do a very brief introduction to the issue. All of us I accept that Cayuga Lake is one of our premier natural resources, if not the most, and it doesn't get the love that it deserves. There's a lot of organizations that are working on issues, but I have a list of about 15 threats to the lake that, and a lot of them are not receiving that much attention. So, we're here to talk about the potential impact of salt on the freshwater lake. And so I'll just go back through some of the history. I don't know, most of you are familiar with that there has been mining there, but may not be totally on all the various issues. But the mining began in the early 1900s. There were both a solution mine and a rock salt mine. The solution mine closed and moved to Watkins Glen because it was in too close proximity to the mining that was going on underground. It posed a threat to its survival. And most of the mining in the early years was done under land. Like, for example, Rogues Harbor is above the mine. And it's quite a few 100 acres in that vicinity that is undermined. And a lot of that mining was in the number 4 salt. The mining under the lake is the number 6 level salt, which is about 2,300 feet below the lake. Although in the 1930s, the Cayuga Rock Salt Corporation, which was the predecessor to Cargill in this, got permission from the state to enter under the lake for purposes of mining. As you know, there weren't many environmental rules, or no one was even thinking about the environmental impacts at the time that was done. Our main structure for environmental review was adopted in 1975, quite a long time after the mining began. And it probably received, minimal amount of environmental review until the Red Soft mine collapsed in Livingston County, which drew a lot of people's attention that just were not thinking about that issue, to be concerned about the future of the lake. And our assembly person at the time, Marty Luster, participated in legislative hearings about the failures at Red Soft in Albany. And there's an extensive report on the work that they did. And he lobbied very heavily that an environmental impact statement be conducted at that time. And so there was a lot of back and forth. The Cargill applied for a renewed permit in 1997. They asked for another 5,000 acres to mine. And by now they were almost exclusively under the lake. In the mid-'80s, they went exclusively under the lake. And and there was a lot of concern among the community because the Redsoft mine, fortunately, was not over a lake, under a lake. It was under rural farmland. I mean, there was a lot of damage. There's quite a bit of collapse, a couple bridge collapses, road collapses, a lot of subsidence there. But the aquifer got completely contaminated, and the state had to pay $20 million to the municipalities for the fact that these aquifers are no longer ever be usable. So, so despite our efforts, I mean, Marty was representing a lot of community interest in getting better oversight over the Cargill salt mine. There was a dispute between the DEC and Cargill about DEC's authority to regulate their mine. So, so as a matter of fact, in the year 2000, they signed a stipulation agreement between Cargill and the state, where the state said, we believe we have authority to regulate this mine, where Cargill says we retain our right to oppose that position. So as a consequence of that, and the decision that was made here, Cargill agreed to give more information to the state, but they wanted most of that information to be kept secret, confidential, and there was no, it wasn't what you'd call a seeker process, because there was no opportunity for public involvement in the review. And so they did eventually prepare these Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 2 is called an expanded environmental assessment. And then they did a public comment period on the renewal permit in 2002, and there was people asked for some of the documentation that Cargill had prepared, and they opposed it, and the DEC denied them access to the information. And so there was an appeal taken from that. The permit was renewed, but the appeal was not yet heard. The appeal was heard by senior ALJs in the Department of Environmental Conservation, and their ultimate recommendation.
What are ALJs?
Administrative law judges.
Okay.
They handle the legal issues between applicants and the public. And their recommendation at the end, they said the information that was being sought is absolutely essential for anyone to do a review, any sort of reasonable review. It would ask for seismic data, it asked for geological data, and Cargill opposed all of the requests, saying that if you share any of this information from the public, we will not share any more information from you. So that's cast a pall over the entire environmental review process. You know, they do give them information. I think the DEC knows what kind of information that they can ask for, and we've never been able to get an environmental impact statement. And the DEC and Cargill are pretty closely aligned in how they relate to us. I mean, because we're sort of a, you know, persistent advocate for the lake and for getting more information, you know, we're not particularly well looked at. And but anyway, so it's important going forward that any of these major decisions about the lake, about if it were to close or if it were to be sold, that we have a closure plan. There's no closure plan right now. There's a surface restoration plan. So in other words, where there's the ground disturbance on the surface, like a sand and gravel mine, you restore it to its original condition. And but it says very little about what you could do about the mine and the subsequent exposure of all this now new veins of salt that are exposed to freshwater intrusion through either leaks or through the shafts. And this is, you know, we haven't done very well at protecting the lake from increasing salinization. And all these new veins were going to be exposed for in perpetuity to all the water that's coming in. So, so my main, I think I'll move on to John, but after you hear his talk, the salt mining beneath the Cayuga Lake improve its water quality. I mean, I think that's essential. If you're going to allow a private entrepreneur to use a public resource, you have to make sure that they do no harm. If no, my ask is to stand by for future recommendations on how to best mitigate its negative impacts of post-salt extraction. You know, humans are incorrigible. Entrepreneurial spirit moves us to take actions a lot of time, but we often don't make an effort to foresee the consequences. So we paint ourselves into a corner and, occasionally, and extracting ourselves may be complicated and expensive. Most recent example, I know several of you were on the tour about PFAS. I mean, nobody was thinking about the cost of cleaning up PFAS, but PFAS is very cheap to manufacture, but it's hundreds of times more expensive per pound to recapture it. So I just want us to be thinking about the future use of the lake. I sense that we're going to be really relying on this as other areas in the country become less habitable, and I think we really need to focus, seriously on how we might protect the lake going forward. So I'll turn it over to John now.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. That was an excellent presentation. I'm now going to hopefully share my screen. And I'm hoping for a double view. Let's see, slideshow. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm not seeing the double screen. If anyone can let me know how to see a double screen, because I can't see my notes, but
Your
anyway.
first slide is up.
But there's no notes there, John.
Yeah, I can't see the notes on my screen. Let me go back. So anyway, I'll talk without the notes since I'm not getting the double screen. So this is a picture of Outfall 001. Cargill on their Portland Point campus has about 12 Speedies outfalls. This is the one with a 40,000 milligrams per liter of chloride. That's twice the salinity of seawater. This was a rainy day. You can see there's an ample flow there. And so most of the salt loading of Cayuga Lake by salt mining has been through these outfalls. And this particular one drains the area at the north end of their campus where there are 3 large salt storage pads. And we sample this occasionally. Jeremy Dietrich, a contract hydrologist, pulled 2 samples in July, the higher one of which was 34,000 milligrams per liter of chloride, almost twice the salinity of seawater just pouring into the lake. So despite 3 years of remediation or improvements of their campus under a 3-year consent order under federal court, Clean had provided data for a Clean Water Act lawsuit. Cargill settled out of court, but it was supervised by federal court in Binghamton, and Cargill built a large salt shed over their lower salt pad, but unfortunately we're not seeing much of a change in terms of chloride loading into the lake.
John, do you want questions while you're going along, or do you want to wait till the end?
Actually, questions as I go along would be perfect.
Okay.
Any questions so far?
No, and yeah, so just chime in if anybody has questions.
Perfect. So I do have some prior experience with assessment of salt mining and hiring experts. So Clean has, none of us are geologists on Clean, but we've hired probably the world's best evaporite geologist, John K. Warren in Australia, to give us advice and write various papers. We're happy to share those papers. But in 1991, I was working for Worldwide Fund for Nature in Switzerland, WWF International, and we learned that WWF US, World Wildlife Fund, had been offered a $10 million grant from Freeport McMoran. And so it fell to me, I was one of 2 Americans working at WWF International, I hired to assess, was this a good idea to take this $10 million grant? I hired 2 German mining experts. They flew out to look at the Grasberg mine in Indonesia. And this is one of the things they found, 90 square miles of tailings that were choking a river, flooding over tropical rainforest. And to cut to the chase, we told WWF, do not take a $10 million greenwashing grant from Freeport McMoran. And that mine, by the way, produces about 1.6 billion in gold per year. So it's a very large facility, and they're also probably the 5th largest copper mine in the world. Coming back to our mine, I had hoped to go to Google Earth Pro so we could zoom in and look at some of these things in detail. But a couple of characteristics here. This is the furthest that Cargill is mined to the south. Ithaca Yacht Club is right down here. Actually, no, Ithaca Yacht Club is probably here. And this was the end of Cargill's mining preserves at one point, but then they got expanded down almost to Route 13 here in 1997. And the distance from here, their southernmost reach up to Cayuga Power, up here where they're mining now, is, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving. I can see it. I hope
Yes.
you guys can too.
Yes,
Oh,
we
good.
can.
Okay, perfect. So that's a distance of 8 miles. So this is a very strung out mine. This is the number 6 mine under the town of Lansing. And by the way, Cargill's maps of the number 4 mine never were geo-referenced. So there would just be this mine showing the shape of the number 4 mine. And because it was complicating, I'm not showing it here, but the number 4 mine actually came out to as far as Myers Point, this area here. So Cargill was mining under the lake, but not revealing that to the public for probably a decade or 2 before they went down and started mining the 6th level. And it was only by seeing a small little line that looked like their permitted reserves on one of their early 2000 maps that Karen Edelstein was able to geo-reference Cargill's maps to actually be able to show it as we're seeing it in Google Earth. So this is Triphammer Road coming up here. Cargill got a little past it, but ran into technical difficulties. But there was some shearing happening near some of the pillars. It was dangerous to mine, so they stopped mining east. But they've got a lot of mineral rights here still. Similarly, south of Gulf Creek, probably 1,200 acres of mineral rights not yet tapped into. And this area, over 2,000 acres of mineral rights, and only a small portion, sorry, I'm not seeing my notes, but maybe 200 acres of mineral rights. But as they, sorry, let's go back.
John?
As they kept trying to go east, they would, they just couldn't get over here. And now this green map here, this is a Cargill map identified as an artesian aquifer. We assume it's fresh water, and their map ended here, but it probably does go under the city of Ithaca. So if there were a mine collapse as occurred in 1994 at Retzoff, and water from this aquifer began pouring in, it can hold 15 billion gallons of water, we think. It's possible that there would be significant subsidence under the city of Ithaca as an aquifer under the city of Ithaca dewatered. Here again, we see an instance about 200 acres under Cayuga Nature Preserve. Cargill pushed panel U12 in, but they did not come back and try again. So we assume they had technical issues. And notice this panel is wider than any of the other ones. Cargill probably was too wide here. There was this instability. They had to do some backfilling in this area here. But, and if I had my Google Earth, I can pull it up later. But these are anomalies A through E that were mapped by a Cargill consultant in 2010. Cargill had completely mined under anomaly E before the DEC was informed about this anomaly map. anomaly D, Cargill agreed not to mine near it with a 1,000-foot setback. And we expected there to be a 1,000-foot setback from the remaining 3 anomalies. But in this case, Cargill did some testing. Again, the reports are not public. We just got a few sentences from a review of their reports that indicated they'd done some drilling upwards and not hit any brine pockets. So they were allowed to mine under anomaly C. Our geologist, John K. Warren in Australia, he's written an 1,800-page textbook on evaporites. Chapter 13 is all about mine failures. And he's told us that the glacier, when it came down and gouged out these thin areas in the overlying carbonate beam, the Onondaga limestone, it's really one continuous scour. And indeed, the DEC's consultant, Vincent Scavazzo, has also shown them connected. So we're very alarmed that Cargill is mining under them. But we can come back to some of these issues later. These, by the way, are mineral rights that Cargill owned as of maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Here's shaft 4. Clearly, there's some connectivity issues. They can't begin mining here. This is, for instance, a NYSEG right-of-way. So unless NYSEG were to give permission, Cargill wouldn't be able to mine from here over to that other one. So let's see. This is just what we think is subsidence damage. You can see some breakage here. This lintel, it's not the best picture, but some of these lintels are sloping down to the right, some breakage. And we believe this happened about the time, maybe within a year or two, of Cargill beginning to mine under this Rogues Harbor Inn, built in 1830, the oldest building, in the town of Lansing. One question you may have is whether or not a new owner, if Morton Salt or some other salt company were to buy the mine from Cargill, could they mine into any of these very large areas that haven't been mined yet? This is Lake Watch here. In 2004, Cargill was planning to mine under here. And right now, the technology they're using is they drill holes and put explosives in them and set off explosions 3 times a day. They have to kind of clear the workers away while the toxic fumes go away. This machine is called a continuous mining machine. No need for explosions. You just set it up and let it go. So it's possible that a new owner might transition to this newer technology without explosions. You less damage the overlying rock, in theory safer. But this is a picture, and I apologize, it's not a good one. But in 1980, there was a salt mine under a lake in Louisiana, and a Texaco drilling rig right about here was here. And we don't know whether the Diamond Salt Mine's maps were inaccurate or whether they were using the wrong coordinates, but they drilled into the mine. And within a few hours, a huge vortex happened. And again, I'm not seeing my notes, but 11 barges got sucked down into this hole. The entire drilling rig disappeared. And 65 acres of a nearby live oak botanic garden got just washed in, sucked into the vortex. And I would mention that the Taganic Park, the eastern area just to the east of 89, is 48 acres. And Cargill has had to backfill panel 40B. So the mining panel, I can go back to that, right next to Taganic Park, is a particularly unstable one. So the Texaco and the drilling company eventually paid $12 million to the Live Oak Botanic Garden for having sucked away 65 acres of the Botanic Garden, huge old trees, never to be recovered again. 9 of the barges did pop back up a couple of days later, but the drilling rig never came up. Anyway, if you go to Wikipedia and just look up Lake Penure, you'll see that this went from a shallow lake with a maximum depth of 10 feet, a freshwater lake. Now, according to Wikipedia, it is a permanently brackish lake with a depth as deep as 200 feet, presumably here where the vortex and the connection to the salt mine happened. So it's a much smaller lake. It's about 1,100 acres. I believe Cuba Lake is 42,000 acres. But nonetheless, if we look at history, we have to say, well, could the same thing happen over Cuba Lake? Could we end up with a brackish lake, just the way folks in Louisiana did after this mine accident? Maybe I should try to actually get some closure here, but in this one, we feel Cargill's miners are at risk. There could be an accidental collapse. And Cargill is not abiding by a federal law which requires 2 means of egress from the bottom parts of the mine. They're saying that a single mining panel, let me just go back up there. This is called Northwest 3, this mining panel. Notice this, there's only one way out of this area. And the way that the Mine Safety and Health Administration has agreed to let Cargill get around that law is they say, well, there are some mining pillars, rows of mining pillars inside the panel, and each one of those can be considered a point of egress. But, if a vehicle caught fire and smoke quickly moved throughout that panel, which I think is 40 yards wide, egress would be impaired. And so salt mining in Cuba Lake has made it more than twice as saline as 9 other Finger Lakes. An accidental collapse could be catastrophic for the long-term use of this resource. I'm now going to go kind of into fast forward, and I'd like to mention an apology. I earlier sent our contract geologist, Ray Vaughn, had done a really excellent, detailed 30-slide presentation. I sent that in and saying I'll probably use most of this, but I found it just took too much time to get through that. So I'm going to, I think it's with the record. You can always go back and read that. But, cavity volume 10 to 15 billion gallons. But I'd like to mention 5 mine closures. The Himrod mine closed in 1976 on Seneca Lake after 1 fatality, owned by Morton Salt, rumored to be a possible buyer of Cuba Salt Mine. So they know what can go wrong. It turned out the salt quality was terrible. There was about 1 million tons of unusable salt on the surface when they closed this mine. They put a berm around it and dissolved it with water and pumped it down into a disposal well, which was deeper than the bottom of Seneca Lake, but it wasn't deeper than the original valley bottom. So there's a possibility that a lot of that salt brine began seeping up into the lake, which may explain why it's the saltiest lake of the 11 Finger Lakes. Cargill Belle Isle mine, 1968, a fire killed all 21 miners underground. A few years later, 9 years later, an explosion killed 5 people. Anyway, that one closed in 1985. Diamond Salt Mine, as I mentioned, closed in 1980. Redstolf Salt Mine collapsed and flooded after in 1994-95. And Cargill has just closed their Avery Island Salt Mine in 2022 after 2 fatalities. There was an undisclosed settlement with the relatives of those miners. So I think we get the sense that the Cargill family is a little embarrassed about, having people die in their mines, and they may want to get rid of the entire salt division, or they're just seeking to sell this mine. But I think I sent, as part of the package of information, an article in The Deal, I think it was July 20th, which indicated that Cargill has hired Deutsche Bank to sell Cuba Mine for them. And we're worried that, if a hedge fund were to buy the mine, they would want to, concentrate on profits, maybe flip it, sell it a few years later. So in that sense, we think Cargill should be required to continue owning the mine and to post $10 billion as an environmental bond until the mine voids under the mine have closed, a process that could be 15 to 20 years. So this slide shows the Redstolf mine at a similar depth, similar geology to Cuba Mine. When that failed, a rubble chimney went all the way to the surface. There was no lake up here. The Geneseo River The Genesee River was nearby, but there was basically just cornfields and, as Brian mentioned, a bridge or two and a highway that got damaged. People's wells ran dry maybe 4 or 5 miles away. I'm guessing some of those are now used. This aquifer here, freshwater aquifer, became salinized. Axo Nobel, the owner of the mine, a Dutch company, said, you know, we don't want to keep pumping brine from down here and processing it. What can we pay to go away? The state of New York accepted $20 million, 17 of which went to Livingston County. But over looking at the configuration at the middle of the lake, near where Cargill is mining now, the original glacier gouging has cut through most of the Onondaga limestone, leaving a relatively perilously thin amount of strong rock between the bottom of Cayuga Lake and the mine. So risks, I'm going to fast forward here. How are we doing for time? I had it.
We started a little early, John, so we're fine. While you're saying that, any questions to John at this point? Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay, thanks, Annie. So the RV here means this slide was completely by Ray Vaughn. Other ones that are unmarked are ones that either I've adapted or written myself. But, you know, Ray is saying that mine flooding is sometimes done intentionally when you close a mine, or it can be accidental in the case of Retzoff, or natural water can seep in over time because the shafts have leakage, and unless you're pumping that leakage back to the surface, eventually Mother Nature will fill that void. And things become very salty as a mine is flooded. So salty, Ray has calculated this figure, 193,000 milligrams per liter of chloride. And keep in mind, the seawater is about 19,000. So the water under Cayuga Lake, if the mine were to be flooded intentionally or by accident, would be about 10 times the salinity of seawater. Ray has calculated that the mine cavity, we think, is probably 10 to 15 billion gallons would hold, whereas the lake volume is about 200 times that. And so presently, my chloride concentration is about 40 milligrams, but suddenly you have a mine that has this much concentration underneath it, and there's a hydraulic connection as that rubble chimney that the Retzoff mine had. Where was that? Sorry, this is taking longer than I expected. Yep, went right by it. Just what you needed to wake you back up. Anyway, if there's a good, strong hydraulic connection and mixing throughout the entire lake, it would bring the lake up to 965 milligrams. Drinking water standard is 250. So, you know, almost 4 times the EPA's safety threshold for chloride. And by the way, for people who are hypertensive, and I believe the FDA estimates that almost half of the US population has some hypertension. For people with severe hypertension, they're not supposed to drink water that has more than 20 milligrams per liter of chloride. Cayuga Lake already has over 40. So we need to make the lake water better, because I'm one of those 30,000 people that's drinking Cayuga Lake water every day from the Bolton Point system. Ray made this slide. I put a little RV down here in the corner. These are various taxa which are impaired by salinity, and I won't go into them, but I don't know if Lampsillus, gosh, maybe that's lampreys. Anyway, this is Cayuga Lake now, this is Seneca Lake, and this is if at this 965, that if the lake and the flooded mine were to become equal. So anyway, a lot of various aquatic biota would be damaged. Some people say, well, aren't Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake just historically more salty all along because they're deeper and closer to the salt formation? That was a long-standing theory. But John Halfman, who's probably the preeminent limnologist in central New York, has been studying. He has a particular interest in cations, magnesium chloride, sodium, But these graphs were produced by a USGS technician, Glenn Jolly. Actually, this should be another N there. But this shows that back in the day, in the early 1900s, Seneca Lake was a little over 40 milligrams per liter for chloride, and Cayuga Lake as low as below 20. If you, this little blue one here, but hovering, this is 1910. So salt mining, by the way, had begun before 1900 with solution mining, but room and pillar mining started, gosh, Brian may remember the exact figure, but anyway, around 1913, somewhere in that time. And then in the 1970s, fluoride levels got really high. As you can see, 200, we have a 200 number here for Seneca Lake and a high of about 140. So when Cargill bought the mine in 1970, they either with the DEC, which also started in 1970, either told them to stop dumping fines into Cayuga Lake, or they just said, this isn't a smart thing to do. So chloride levels began drifting downwards. And according to one study, if there was no more salt loading from mining, it would have come down to 32. It would have been down here, similar to Hemlock or Skinny Addles Lake. But it stayed up here because of those Speedy's outfalls, or so we think. And John Halfman thinks that road salt probably contributes an additional amount, maybe as much as 10 parts per million. And this is one point. Chloride levels in the early century indicate natural brine seeps are not driving salinity. So that's a point that we need to keep in mind. Could things suddenly get a lot better if the DEC said, okay, no more mining under the lake, you can mine under land, go for it. There is problems with that. Yes, there's more rock, there's less likelihood of a collapse, and there would be no direct vertical pathway into the lake anymore. However, there would still be connectivity, or likely to be connectivity, between the mine voids under land and the ones under the lake. And secondly, movement of salt along the railroad next to the lake is risky. We had a derailment in July with about 300 gallons of diesel fuel spilt right next to the lake within a mile of the Bolton Point system. And, the salt stretches from Syracuse to Detroit, a distance of about 400 miles. So why on earth choose to mine salt in the 1.5 miles that's underwater in Cayuga Lake? It just makes no sense at all. There's so much salt wherever you go underground. There's plenty of mineable salt. And one salt mine that is mining under the other room and pillar salt mine is Hampton Corners Mine in Livingston County. It's quite close to the Retzoff mine. Much smaller company. Cargill had $177 billion in revenue in 23. American Rock Salt only $40 million in 2022. Mining under a lake, no. They have 400 employees, unionized workforce, 2 geologists on staff. Cargill, to our knowledge, they're very secretive, so maybe they've got some that we don't know about, but we believe the correct number is no geologists on staff. This mine is much newer, started in about year 2000, produces almost twice as much as the Cargill mine, and they recognize New York State's authority to regulate their mining. They've done 2 EISs in the past 23 years. Cargill has done 0 over 53 years. Cargill's had 6 fatalities. EIS has created a safer mine. ARS has had 0 fatalities. I want to pick up the pace here. Skip over this slide. We can come back to it later. And here's a legal question. Maybe Brian should be presenting on this one, but we think Cargill's actually violating their mining permit, the new one issued in 2019, the notorious one that allowed Cargill to start managing the DEC's consultant, which they paid for since the early 2000s, but the new permit allows them to manage the consultant, which I assume means, because I've worked as a consultant myself, that the draft report gets sent to the manager. They can suggest edits before the DEC ever sees, the annual plan. So according to the permit, Cargill would have to submit new studies before to determine whether there needs to be a 1,000-foot setback from anomaly B. And in 2017, Cargill produced a new map of anomaly B, showing it to be about half the size of their consultants' maps. And there was no consultant, no expert third-party consultant his name attached to the new 2017 mine. It just shrank by about half, freeing up about another $92 million worth of salt that would become mineable. And that's, so anyway, we think that Cargill hasn't shown, the public has not seen any new studies that establish why there would not need to be a 1,000-foot standoff from anomaly B. And I'll just show you the amount of shrinkage. This was the 2015 definition of anomaly B that came out in 2010. This is what Cargill shrank it down to in 2011. And you can see they're already mining under what the original definition. We'd love to see the papers that justify the shrinkage of it. But I'll tell you an interesting story. Anomaly, and this is the 2017 definition of anomaly C, it shrank considerably, but then as soon as Cargill got permission to mine under it, the next Cargill map showed it snapping back not only to its original size, but slightly bigger. Anyway, enough on anomalies. This is a fault that we believe covers this area. Cargill presents it as something this long, about a fifth of how it was originally defined. So anyway, a bit about anomaly flicks. You can see almost $100 million associated with the shrinkage of anomaly A, almost 100 for the shrinkage of anomaly B. Conclusions, close the mine, subject to an EIS, which would help define how to close it. Does everything that Cargill's put in the mine need to come out, all foreign materials? We think Cargill should post a $10 billion bond with New York State pending the closure of mine voids. We think that Cargill miners should get lifetime health insurance, at least until they qualify for Medicare. Retraining of miners for new and better jobs, less dangerous jobs, and ample severance and pension benefits, and something for the Cargill family to consider, creating a Cargill salt mining museum on the site of their present mine. So with that, ready for questions, and I apologize for running over time.
No worries, John. Open it up to questions. It's a lot of information. Randy?
Yes, thank you for the information. And obviously you've done a lot of homework on this, so I'm not going to question any of the data that you've provided. But this is a state issue, correct? The county really has no jurisdiction over this.
Right. We've had, with an environmental impact statement, the county would have had an opportunity to make comments that would have had to be taken into consideration in issuing the permit. So there are roles for, we had litigation recently, and we had resolutions passed that a wide variety of municipalities, but we had 4 on the litigation was town and city of Ithaca, town of Ulysses, and the village of Union Springs. So, I mean, there is a role here because this is a very valuable asset to the county. The county wants to protect it because it provides a lot of resources. We're hoping to be able to eventually hire a resource economist. When we say $10 billion, it seems like an astronomical amount of money, but if you look at the public and private investment in and around the lake, it's huge. And the potential costs to tourism and other factors, you need to protect the lake. Otherwise, the communities will take a big economic hit.
I'm not questioning the need to protect the lake. But you mentioned earlier that the DEC and Cargill are aligned. I'm not opposed to a bond. I like the idea if it got closed. I think a bond for all sorts of failures is important, not just a salt mine. but I just don't know where the county comes in. I mean, we could do a resolution, right? But and it's, you know, it's a business that's been there for a long time, and there's risk to all businesses, I'm sure. I actually have been to the mine in Louisiana, and because we actually sold Cargill pallets, that's how I ended up there. And they were a good customer, very, very demanding. But they were pumping water down into the salt and sucking about, then sucking out the water, then pulling the salt. So I always wondered how that worked, and apparently it didn't, based on what happened down there. But thank you for the information.
Yeah, I'm always fearful when people don't have many questions, because this is sort of the thing that's created a problem for us in getting support. We came to the county legislature in 2019 to get support for an environmental impact statement on the new shaft that was being constructed. And we did, you know, we almost were successful there. I think we lost by 2 votes. But a lot of legislators said, well, you know, I don't really know anything about this. I think we need to rely on our experts, which is the DEC. And that's sort of the problem we run into everywhere. I mean, no matter how much information we present to, in support of these, people are in a quandary, because, you know, it's our information competing with someone else's information. And so we need to increase the literacy of local residents of the legislature so that they can begin to understand it and ask difficult questions. That's why I say, I asked the question, do you think salt mining is improving the water quality of Cayuga Lake? And I don't think so, but maybe other people have ideas on that.
I'll jump in with a thought. When NYSEG announced, what was it, about a year ago, that they were putting the Bell Station parcel up for auction, many organizations in Tompkins County, I'm not sure if the legislature chimed in or not, said, you know, this is a bad idea. This 400-acre parcel is the largest, you know, it had, I think, 1,300 feet of undeveloped shorefront, the largest undeveloped area in all 11 Finger Lakes. They said, you know, this was taken by eminent domain. It's not proper to sell it to the highest bidder. And the governor was convinced that this was a bad idea. And eventually, the Finger Lakes Land Trust was able to buy it with the promise from the DC that the you know, would become a wildlife management area once adequate funding was found by the state to buy it from Finger Lakes Land Trust. So we think a similar model where municipalities, the legislature, Cayuga Lake Watershed Network, Clean, Anna Kellis, Senator Schumer, everyone chimes in and says, bad idea. There should never have been a salt mine under Cayuga Lake. And, you know, the Cargill family needs to be held on the hook. They just can't sell all that liability away. They need to instead post an environmental bond. So that's sort of our model. And, you know, in terms of local control, the town of Lansing could have become the lead agent for the Shaft 4 project instead of the DEC. They could have insisted on an EIS. And I think they just felt this project's too big for us. We'll just let DEC do it. But, you know, the town of Ulysses and the town of Lansing have jurisdiction out to the center line of the state. You know, there's an example where the town of Lansing board, the town of Ulysses board could pass, you know, regulations saying no transport of salt under, you know, within our jurisdiction. So I think there are types of control that can be, local control that can be exercised. Would, you know, Cargill countersue? Would it become messy and ugly? You know, quite possibly, but I think that's why the DEC never, somebody in Albany probably just said, you know, give them whatever speedies permit they want. And if they don't want to do an EIS, don't make them, you know, but it's time for us to speak up or no one else will.
Thanks, John. Greg? And then Veronica?
Yeah, just a quick question. How does road salt affect the chloride levels in the lake? with all the runoff and things like that. I mean, because we're a heavy salt producer on surface, and, you know, we see with algae blooms and things like that, runoff from farms and other things. What impact does road salt have on lake chloride levels?
I think we let Stephanie answer that question because she's our expert in that area.
So if you go back to the slide that has the different biota that die off, John, with certain levels of chloride, you'll notice one of them is called Daphnia. And there it is, like right in between 125 and 965. So they start to actually die off around 250 milligrams per liter, and they are one of the primary species that eats cyanobacteria. So it creates a huge imbalance in the ecology when we kill off the zooplankton through road salt, through high chloride levels. So as John mentioned, their species permit allows for 40,000 milligrams per liter, far too high for Daphnia to live, and that's, you know, pumping out there on a regular basis. We also believe that there's hydrogeologic connections that have been established between the mine and the surface operations. There is a brine well I should say a beach well that became a brine well after a panel was dug underneath it and on the north side of the east side of the lake, north side of Lansing. So we do believe that the mine is having significant impacts to the salinity levels of the lake, and John had shown the next slide in which that was significantly increasing in the 70s due to fines. It did go back down a little bit, but now we are seeing increases. And we do need to take into the consideration that road salt is having an impact, but of course having the mine is, it's hard to argue that this mine is having no impact on the lake. It's definitely having an impact on the lake. We should also establish something similar to what the Adirondacks did. They had an Adirondack Road Salt Task Force, and they found areas that needed mitigation, and they've been working on monitoring those areas and developing plans around that and using different types of technology to reduce salinity in those areas. We do need something similar here, and we do need funding for our local municipalities to be able to have that kind of technology. But we're not going to mitigate that just through, that sort of technology. We actually have to go to the root source of the issue, which is significant salinization from this mine.
I would just add, in the Adirondacks, there's not a wide network of, municipal drinking water systems. So most people rely on their wells that are often not that far from the road, and they got very concerned with the levels of salt that was showing up in their water testing. So, you wouldn't think of them being at the forefront on this issue, but they spent 2 years doing an investigation, and they just recently came out with a report. I mean, anybody that's interested in that, I could send them the report. But yeah, road salt is, hopefully as time goes on, we'll be using less road salt. They've changed the kind of road salt that they're spreading to be somewhat less, harmful to the roadside vegetation and to water resources. So, I mean, but we need to address that as some areas heavily salt, just like ditching. We had all these discussions about ditching, how different communities do ditching. Some have learned how to do it with having less of an impact on the environment. We can do the same thing with road salt.
So one of my other questions on road salt, because the Cargill mine under Cayuga produces a majority of, I think, the road salt that's used by also New York State. Where does that come from with a mine closure? And what's the impact of that, or has this group looked at how, because this is what we do use right now to salt our roads, what is needed to reduce the dependency on the product that's being produced by the mine?
Well, hopefully we'll be using less road salt. John, I'll let you in just a second. Less road salt over time, as you know, that we're in a climate situation where it's getting warmer. I mean, I think we'll probably have ice where there's a need for some sort of treatment, but we have other New York State mine that produces more road salt, and as the need for it declines, I think we'll still have the capacity to provide it for the municipalities in New York State.
So, yeah, as you can see from this slide, the smaller, newer more efficient mine is producing, almost twice as much road salt. And they're, a small local company that welcomes regulations. They've done 2 EISs, so it's kind of like the little engine that could. Apparently Cargill has been very aggressive in getting New York State salt contracts this year. Apparently they're trying to burnish the bottom line to make it look more appealing to new buyers. But they probably, if we have a bad winter, they probably wouldn't be able to provide all that they've contracted for. But we've got one good salt mine nearby, and we need to start using less road salt. When I lived in Switzerland, almost no road salt used in the very steepest parts of the mountains. Holland uses, mostly salt. They actually go out and vacuum it back up, in the spring and then store it and then reuse it the next year.
Yeah, I believe New York State got a bill passed to say that we should buy New York State road salt to support New York State businesses, because there was the market was being increasingly intervened by like Chilean salt that's shipped in, because they evaporate sea salt and produce large amounts at lower costs, also lower energy costs. I'm not going to take that one up, but anyway, it's just, yeah, there is a challenge to the road salt market in New York State from foreign producers.
In the town of Enfield, we primarily use sand. So we only cut the product that we put out on the road is only cut with a maximum of 20% salt. So I think that these changes in our technology and adopting these more ecologically friendly ways to take care of these issues would be a primary focus.
And since you have that slide, if I could just chime in, open right now. So where do you get the information that there's currently 210 employees at Cayuga Salt Mine?
Well, we've heard that Cargill's actually having trouble finding enough employees. They're apparently during COVID and now since COVID, they've struggled to find enough employees. So 200 has been kind of the ballpark figure used for years, but I recently heard that they may have up to 230 employees. So, I think finding people willing to work underground in a salt mine could be one of the things driving Cargill's incentive to sell the mine. I also accessed at least some samples from an industry survey of the road salt business, and it basically shows demand plateauing. There's not going to be much growth in demand for road salt in the next decade. So it could be that Cargill's economists have said, let's get out before things start dropping. But anyway, I have to admit that particular figure is one I'm estimating as between the 200 figure and the 230. But, if somebody just emails Sean Wilczynski, he can answer all these questions. But, since we sued our Children's Earth Foundation sued Cargill under the Clean Water Act and won, we haven't been able to, dialogue with Cargill since then.
Sure. Well, I do appreciate you stating what you know from, science-based versus guesstimating or estimating. So I appreciate you clarifying that. Any other questions,
Sure.
Greg? Veronica?
Thank you. Oh boy, I may have forgotten what I was going to ask because it was a while ago. I guess my question boils down to can you reiterate what you want us to do? I know that's the least fun question, and I am just this is a lot of information to take in. I know we had materials in our agenda packet, but a lot of it, honestly, I could not interpret. This was helpful.
Stephanie and I.
Go ahead.
Sorry to jump in. Stephanie and I will be talking to the Water Resources Council of Tompkins County later today, and we did draft a resolution that we sent them. which we thought, was very water specific. And if it would be helpful, we'd be happy to maybe work on a draft that was more, tailored to what a legislature might think and feel about protecting natural resources within their county. We'd be happy to help with a draft resolution, but that's probably one thing. But, picking up the phone, talking to representatives, pressuring the governor in any way, shape, or form. Similarly, Basil Sagos, head of the DEC. This mine is in actually 2 different regions of DEC. Much of it is in Region 7 with headquarters in Syracuse, but the Seneca County part is in Region 8 in Avon, New York. So lots of different channels for putting pressure on. And you probably know many of them that I don't, since, I'm just a citizen living up here in the village of Lansing.
So I expect there to be a sort of robust response to from Cargill. They have public relations people. They're a very politically influential corporation in the world. And there was, when they were building the shaft, they did a public information meeting at the site, and you had to RSVP in advance. And John and I and Kate Darfler from Ulysses responded, but we got a call from their Minnesota headquarters that we weren't allowed to attend this public information meeting, but they would meet with us after all the other folks had gone home. And we came there with a bunch of questions, and their head lawyer said, well, you can ask all the questions you want. We probably won't answer any of them, but you feel free, to ask. And so, I mean, they're very adept at keeping their clients out of trouble, and and they're persuasive. And if people have inadequate amounts of information, and it gets thrown in, like whenever we've been in court, the judge just doesn't have, the judge doesn't have the capacity to understand all the scientific information that's being presented, and they just say, well, let's leave it to the administrative agency to sort this out. And that's where we're left all the time. If we can't really convince people of the, the substance of our position, then this is where we'll be. We'll just keep exposing more salt veins in the lake to infiltration from water, and we'll just increase the salinization of the lake. So we have to find a way.
One little correction there, Brian. It was Carrie Kaplinka-Lair that attended that meeting with us, and it was the only person on the Cargill staff that answered any of our questions was Dave Plumeau, the senior mining engineer. And now that I think of him, I recently heard from someone who was chatting with him just in the last couple of weeks, and he said, yes, the mine is for sale. So I retired a year or two ago, I believe, but he was probably the most senior, most experienced, longtime employee. Been there since the mid '70s, and so if Dave Plumeau's telling people the mine's for sale, it probably is. So we're in this silly situation where Cargill is so secretive and won't admit to the facts that we have to hear things through rumor, through secondhand. I've heard that there are 2 offers on the table. One is probably from Morton Salt. The other one could be from Compass Minerals of Kansas City. 2 reputable salt companies. But, this is not a question of, oh, do an EIS and tell us everything's fine and you can keep salt mining. No, this is the time to keep Cargill on the hook. Think of the pathetic amounts of money that salt, damage mines, so New York State got $20 million for an aquifer wrecked over in Livingston County by the Retzoff mine collapse. That Botanic Garden got $12 million from Texaco and the mining company when Lake Plumeau became, salinized permanently, apparently. And the Diamond Salt Mine, they got $32 million. But this is just chicken feed compared to the long-term damage that is inflicted on, these bodies of water. So, I would urge you, be creative, think of any types of pressures that you can come up with. We'd be happy to help draft a resolution, if that's useful, but I'm sure you're very practiced resolution drafters, And, you know, send us your draft if you want any comment on technical issues, that sort of thing.
Veronica has another question.
Yeah, thanks for your response. Help with drafting a resolution would be great. I think you flatter us too much, or at least me, by saying that we understand the systems throughout the state and outside the county. I think you all have been studying the power structures more closely. And I appreciate you, Brian and also John, sharing your experience at this Cargill public meeting. I think it's, you know, important to get that out there so that if they say like, oh, well, we had a public meeting, that the general public's not left with like, oh, so they must have like engaged in like open dialogue and answering and asking questions. Can you maybe just illustrate for me a little bit about how it was the mine going up for sale that I think precipitated you all like bringing this issue back to this body. So how do we use, and I'm just assuming it's for sale despite the lack of confirmation from the corporation directly. How do you recommend that we, this legislature or members of the public or anyone, like use that timing to, I don't know, to like pressure a mitigation of the safety risks?
Well, I'm just, that's why I'm arguing to inform yourself between now and whatever development. I mean, as Cargill has reported, they're not confirming or denying that it's up for sale. I mean, we can't do anything under those circumstances. We don't know who the purchaser is. We really want to make sure that the massive potential financial liability will be able to be met by the new owners, which is unlikely, and that's why we want Cargill to at least be part of the solution for the problem that they've created. So there's a lot of things that we can't really have a position on until we find out what's happening. That's why I didn't come here with the resolution. It's really important to spend this time, the next month or so, or next 2 months, being ready to respond in a way that will be supportive of the lake going forward. And, I certainly, in terms of us people who live in the real world that are often seen as adversaries, I can tell you lots of stories that, about the inside, shenanigans that we've encountered going ahead. And you may not encounter those because you're a legislator and people want to be on your good side. But it's not been pretty over the 7 or 8 years that we've been doing this.
But let's go back to go ahead, Susan.
So I'm the newest member of the legislature, so I'm learning. But a couple of weeks ago, I'm just wondering about the communication path because a few weeks ago, Ann and I were on a special boat tour of Cayuga Lake with Senator Leah Webb and May and Assemblywoman Anna Kellis. And part of that was the floating classroom to learn about the importance of Cayuga Lake and all of the things that it does for us, including supplies all of our water. And none of this came up. And we passed the salt mine, and there was mention, oh, there's the salt mine. I don't know, Annie, if you heard something different, let me know. But I'm just wondering if, there was this initiative to understand how important the lake is. And your presentation was really wonderful, but very scary. And it is frightening to see what might happen. So I'm wondering about those communication paths. Is it that you start with the resolution at the legislature and then we work our way up to our representatives? Or I'm wondering if you've talked to people on the state level at the Capitol.
Yeah,
Susan, I actually attended that Discover Cayuga Lake trip, and I don't know if you remember.
I thought I recognized you. Yes, I was thinking you were there.
When we came back to land, I did give a quick brief overview. The one thing you do need to understand about Discover Cayuga Lake is they try to stay very non-political. So it has to be very much fact-based, and they try not to get into sort of sticky political situations. So I did wait till I got back on land and addressed everybody from there and gave a brief. The presentation was mostly focused on PFAS, and we had a speaker for that at that moment. I don't think we stayed for her. So
I had to leave.
tried to stay up.
Yeah, I just would
But
say.
I understand that, that Discover Cuba is not political, but I was wondering about the elected officials who are there.
No, they're fully aware. Anna's
They
very.
must be aware.
Yeah, she.
And they are very supportive
Yeah.
of
Okay,
mine.
good.
Yeah, and I met last week with several members, and not Senator Webb's staff, but people at work for the majority leader. I had a meeting with them about this when they visited Ithaca. So, there's widespread knowledge about it, but, you have to recognize this is not regionally important. This is not the kind of thing that we can build huge legislative support at the state, because it mostly affects Cayuga Lake and its immediate environs, and it's hard to build a really strong statewide effort around something like that. There's thousands of issues that people care about, and it's hard to push our way to the top.
I guess one point I'd make is that, when NYSEG announced that they were going to auction off the Bell Station parcel, I think there was a particular date. I think, maybe it was, the announcement was August and the thing was going to be auctioned off in October. So people's hair was, set on fire, like, oh my God, we've got to do something between now and the auction date. And, the reason that Cargill is denying that it's for sale is they would like to be able to hold a press conference and say, Compass Minerals is buying the mine, or they bought it, it's a done deal. And that way, it's like, oh, there's nothing we can do, it's already happened. Whereas if we, say there needs to be a $10 billion environmental bond by the owner of the mine and publicize that, and that's in our resolutions. I hope the legislature would feel comfortable with that $10 billion figure. We don't yet have a resource economist, putting an official value on the lake. But, keep in mind that 95% of the planet's fresh water is in the ice packs, mostly in the Antarctic ice pack. Once that slides into the ocean in the next, 10, 15 years, we're going to have lost 95% of the world's fresh water, and the sea level rise. Gosh, I just read recently that there's been 7 inches of sea level rise in the Mississippi Delta just in the last decade. So as sea level rise is pushing, the residents of Miami, New York City, Boston, and everywhere in between inland, those people are going to arrive in central New York and say, we need fresh water. And if we have been so unfortunate, I won't use any more colorful adjectives, to have allowed, Cayuga Lake to have been salinized, we would look like first-class idiots, So, the thing about environmental law is the local stakeholders have to pound the table and be the squeaky wheel, or there isn't enough resources to enforce the law. Some other squeaky wheel is going to get the attention.
Thanks, Randy.
Yes, thank you. Clean water is really important to our area, obviously, and it's an asset that we need to protect. So thank you for focusing on that. Cargill's a very wealthy, privately owned company, and they're into all sorts of stuff. I mean, they make chocolate flavorings. They make scented things. Of course, they're into ag. They're all over the place. There's risk there. I don't doubt that at all. To measure the risk is the question. I'm not opposed to asking for them to put some type of environmental bond on it. I don't know what that number is. You can buy a bond in the regulators that determine the amount of the bond and what you would have to pay for that bond would do the measuring of the risk themselves. And that may tell a story all by itself, right? So but I have another question. Water quality is important, and I know Cornell is pulling water out of the lake to cool their buildings. And I read something, they don't have to test anymore. Is that correct? They don't have to test their system anymore? Or?
I think they need to renew their permit, and that'll involve some testing. They did have a massive amount of testing when it was first installed, and several $1 million worth of research was conducted, which was very helpful to all of us interested in all the factors in the lake, because it affected a lot of other issues, and it was done by a very credentialed organization, that did that. So I didn't hear that that there's not testing anymore, but I think that they will be required to submit some tests when they renew their permit.
Okay, thank you.
And there was a lot of opposition to the lake source cooling when it was done, and I was, among that group of environmentalists that were less concerned about it, because the trade-offs were, we reduced the amount of fossil fuels we're using tremendously to cool the campus, and we haven't yet demonstrated any significant impacts on the lake. Not that there aren't impacts, but I think there are less than the impacts that would have been created by continuing to use a lot of fossil fuel cooling at Cornell.
But keep in mind, I don't think you can pull water out of the lake and put it back in without having a speedies permit. At least when Cayuga Power pulled cooling water out and put it back in, that was outfall 001, had to be tested monthly. So I would be astonished if lake source cooling doesn't have a speedies permit requiring monthly testing. Sometimes the devil's in the details. Are they testing for all the right analytes that we think they should be? I'll just mention one issue. They're pulling, very deep cold water from the non-photic zone, which contains a lot of soluble reactive phosphorus. That's being reduced into the shallow photic zone at the south end of the lake, making it available to blue-green algae. So there's a possibility that, it's true, lake source cooling isn't adding any additional phosphorus to the lake, but it's repositioning it into the photic zone, so that there could be a downside to that. I think Cornell's rather cleverly, or their consultants have said, but we are pushing that water. We're actually creating more circulation, where we're pushing things from the shallow end of the lake into the deeper area. Anyway, let's not get off into lake source cooling, but I'm pretty sure they have to report monthly water quality.
Thank you.
I had a couple quick questions. I think there'll be hopefully quick answers. If the mine is sold, my understanding is that if it's transferred to, say, another owner that is going to do salt mining, that they would not need a new permit. They could use the existing permit. Is that correct to your knowledge?
Yeah. Well, there's the claim that since there's not a significant change in operations, that it's a type 2 seeker review, not requiring a full EIS or anything. But excuse me, my feeling was that we had a chance in 2000 to do an environmental impact statement. I think it was wrongfully decided not to do it. I don't think that the state complied with the seeker requirements, and and we've heard that there are other firms interested that may not want to do exactly what Cargill was doing. I'm hopefully not, this is not true about a waste company, but anyway, it's something we have to be alert to. And I've had off the record conversation with both people in the DEC and the AG's office that all thought that this should never have gotten this far without an EIS. I mean, you have multifamily building complexes that do, Maplewood did an EIS. I mean, it's not a big deal to do for a major, and this is a huge, we're talking about 6 square miles of empty cavities beneath the lake that are going to fill with water, and they'll have access to those salt layers that have been exposed. I just can't explain how we can get this far down the road without having a really intense review that requires not just the consultant that the applicant hires. The DEC doesn't have a consultant. It doesn't have a consultant anymore that they hire. They rely on the applicant's consultant. They don't have staff with any sort of expertise in this area. So, it just worries me that if we were to just continue down the road doing the same thing, having a procedural, all of our engagements with the DEC have been wholly procedural, nothing substantive. So, I mean, if we go on for more years without having a substantive discussion about the potential impacts, I think it's just wrong.
Thank you. And the salt that's being pulled out of the mine, you talked about it being on the, being exposed to air and the elements. Is all of it covered, and some of it then got covered because the salt was getting into the lake? Is it totally covered now, the salt that they're taking out?
No, I was just looking down at there are 3 pads. So one of them now has a building over it, what they used to call lower pad. Now that's the lower salt shed, I guess. The middle pad is completely tarped as we speak, if I'm remembering correctly, and then the upper pad is still being filled. But over the 5, 6, 7 years that I've been looking at Cargill's management of these pads, so salt, as we understand it, when it comes out of the mine, may be close to 0% moisture. Salt is hygroscopic, as you know, when you're trying to use a salt cellar in July and it's not coming out, it absorbs moisture. So we've noticed that in the past, Cargill would leave, maybe 50,000 tons of salt exposed to significant downpours, rain events. And because salt is hygroscopic, maybe most of that moisture just trickled down into the big mound of salt and didn't drain out the bottom. I think Cargill has become more attentive to begin tarping, more self-conscious. I think they're tarping the salt as they fill the pads now. But there's still a lot, just based on our most recent sampling that we have results for in July. We sampled again just a week ago. We don't have those results yet. 001 is producing, salt water into the lake that's higher than seawater. It's not a good thing. Cargill could be required to use reverse osmosis just to, or evaporate. There are many ways. Cargill is evaporating. They have a solution mine in Watkins Glen. They know perfectly well how to, turn dissolved brine into usable salt. They could presumably do that at their Portland Point campus if they wanted.
Yeah, historically, the conveyor belt dumped the salt that was coming out of the mine into a large vat, which would load trucks. You drive your truck under. Well, it rusted and it collapsed and killed the driver of the truck. And after that, they just had the salt coming out of the conveyor and going to the ground, and then in that distance, wind would remove the fines, and there were neighbors up there that could write their names on their cars or windows or whatever because there was so much salt in the air. So yeah, there's a list of best practices in this district court settlement of things that they were doing previously that they're no longer allowed to do.
Okay, and is anybody are they required to test the water the nearby, that is possibly going into the lake for
no.
chlorine?
No, they are not.
They're not required to do that. So who was testing the water? Was it Clean or another organization?
So Clean has hired a hydrologist, Jeremy Dietrich, to sample various locations on Minigar Brook and Gulf Creek, and some of the ditches and outfalls, culverts, you name it. We've done a lot of sampling, and during the negotiations when Our Children's Earth sued Cargill under the Clean Water Act, they sent one of their nice attorneys from San Francisco, and he was just a really nice guy. They reached a settlement, but one of the things that they were incredibly stubborn about was they said, absolutely not. We will never, I'm making, paraphrasing, I wasn't there, but apparently, I was told, they said, we will not agree to do any monitoring of Gulf Creek or Minigar Brook, anything more than what, the Speedies permit requires. And the mine manager has told the town of Lansing in a meeting that, I was present at, that he expects the new Speedies permit to be much more restrictive. That's something that, a county legislature resolution should mention, that, the DEC should go back to the early 1980s, much more restrictive, 160 times more restrictive Speedies permit. brine should just not be allowed to be discharged into the lake at all.
I'm interested to see what the Water Resources Council, you said they're meeting today,
Yes.
right? So interesting to see if they pass a resolution, and then I'd like to see, what, if anything, our state representatives, what information they bring out, or if they are passing any resolutions, just our people have any other ideas, before we took something up?
I didn't want to be premature, because there are so many variables right now. It's hard to, we'd create a resolution that addressed maybe a situation other than what eventually becomes the outcome here. And, but we have to remain alert, because there is that possibility that things will move fast behind the scenes and deprive us of really having that's happened to me many times before, where, we were preparing to do something and there was a deal made and it was too late. So I don't want to be there either.
Right. I think as far as, to me, looking at something at some point, especially of asking them or requiring them to have a closure plan with some bond, to me seems, that's required of, solar or PV installations, wind farms.
They say they do have one. They'll say they have one, but it's a surface water. The surface mostly addresses surface matters. So they have a surface land reclamation plan, and basically they address the lake by saying that we'll do something to plug up the shafts. But there's a lot at stake in how this is done. Whether they try to keep the water from entering the mine after it's closed, to keep it from reducing the size of the pillars and having the thing collapse over time, or whether they put water in to keep the pressure up, to keep the rocks from bringing the whole system down. This is why I'm not a scientist. I think we really need some support and investigation before, and it's going to require some extensive work. And we're looking at the impact on the ecology. How significant is a more salinated lake, and how much more salinated will it become, given different circumstances? Whether saline water is heavier, usually would stay down, but if there's a pressure from above, it pushes it up to the surface. So all these things need to be addressed by scientists, and this is what didn't happen in 2000 when they didn't do an EIS.
Well, thank you very much for coming and doing this presentation. Brian, Stephanie, and John, I really appreciate it. And stay in touch.
Thank you for having us. One last detail I forgot to mention, the financial assurance that Cargill has posted for the mine at present is $3.5 million. And that's because it just addresses how to plant grass seed at Portland Point once they leave. I'm being somewhat facetious, but $3.5 million. The cost of cleaning up the above ground surface area could take many years. We've seen that on South Hill, where TCE contamination is an issue. There have been some chemical spills on the Portland Point site. Could take years to clean it up. Thanks so much for having us. Love to talk. We'll keep you posted as to if we learn anything new.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, any committee member reports? Okay, and you had sent an email about CCE. They had passed their accreditation or their financial.
Randy, can you please use your mic?
Cornell Crop Extension has to go through accreditation, as all do in New York State, in the U.S. And they weren't close to having that accreditation. There's 42 measurements, I believe. They're financial. There's also program. There's all sorts of things. And so they only had about half of those done 3 years ago for whatever reason. And so they just finally completed all 42 and just got acknowledgement from corporate CCE on campus that they did that. And so one of the things that did is when you don't have a good system, you can't charge an overhead rate over 10%. So that, because that's the one you don't have to prove. You're state related. So now that they've done that, they can look at their programs, and they're literally losing money on their grants because they couldn't charge really what should be 13 or 14%. On top of that, their finances are well documented now. They have a good system. I'm on the finance committee there, and they're well secured, and they their budget's $8 million, and they have $1.5 million in reserves. So just to give you a perspective on that, they are using some of those reserves for their upcoming budget, much like other people, but they're well reserved. So
Thank you.
I gotta go.
And I just wanted to mention a couple of things that Veronica and I met with some folks on Friday afternoon, and we met with some folks from Zero Waste Ithaca, and to talk about an initiative they have, which is called Skip the Stuff, which is when you go to a restaurant, for instance, or you get takeout somewhere, that very often automatically they'll give you utensils, napkins, packets of condiments. So in other places, in other municipalities, they've passed local laws where that you have to ask for that they can't give it out automatically. So we'll keep you updated on that. And then the other topic that we talked about with some other folks was about bird-friendly designs of buildings. And they wanted to come, or we talked to them about coming to this committee at some point and giving us a presentation on that. It might be something that we consider for our county buildings and encourage municipalities to do. They're also, I think they said they're going to the city of Ithaca too, and so we'll keep you updated on that. Anything else from members or anybody else? All right, then I would appreciate everybody's time. I know it was a long presentation, but it's a lot of good information, and so I hope everybody's had a little bit of time to digest that. You probably have some more questions later. But thanks, everybody, and we're adjourned for today. Thank you.